felt like a pilgrimage. You felt like Mecca. You know, you felt like. And so I'm like, oh, I'm going to come here every day about you.
Hello, everyone. We're about to get started with this event. So, all panelists, please come up to the front. Come out. Can you shut off the music, please? Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. I am Christina Joy. I'm the events coordinator here at Sankofa Video Books and Cafe. Sankofa Video Books and Cafe was founded in 1997 by Sharif Kiana and Haile Garima, two Black filmmakers representing the diaspora. And they came out with Sankofa the Movie in 1993, and Sankofa the Bookstore is the extension of that. Sankofa the Movie is available right now on Netflix. I know y'all got a Netflix account. So, welcome tonight to this lovely panel, In Pursuit of Black Wealth. We originally had 3 panelists, but you know, life happens. And so tonight we are blessed to have 2 amazing panelists, Jessica Nembhard and David Fontaine, 2 authors of 2 very important books about Black wealth and economics and cooperatives. Like this is a conversation I've been waiting to have for a while, so I'm excited. Are y'all excited?
Yes.
Good. So I guess I'll just take a seat because I'm the one doing it. So I just wanted to start with who you all are. If you both could introduce yourselves and then maybe go into why you were attracted to do this work, then we can get started.
Sure, thank you. So I'm Jessica Nembhard. I'm a political economist, and I study mostly community economic development, and also have specialties in Black political economy, Black wealth inequality, community-based approaches to justice. And I became an economist actually a little bit late in life because I was interested in strategies to eradicate poverty and to eradicate economic inequality. And the more I studied what we now call solidarity economics and mutual aid and cooperative economics, the way that people pool their resources in order first to address their survival needs and then second to address their thriving and prosperity needs, the more I got excited about those possibilities. And so I started talking to Black communities about community-based economic development and cooperative ownership. And most people didn't know about it, didn't feel like it was a tradition that Black folks had. And so I took that challenge to do the research to write the book Collective Courage, A History of African American Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice. And there I tried to chronicle and document the ways that African Americans have practiced not just mutual aid, but actually formal economic cooperation, starting co-ops throughout history, to understand that we do have this legacy and that it has worked as an alternative wealth building strategy when it's been able to be successful.
Amazing. And David?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Sankofa Bookstore for inviting me here this evening. I consider it an honor and a privilege to be here to have this opportunity to speak in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. I was born and raised in Sacramento, California, and I was raised what I would call an entrepreneurial minister. And being the son of a minister, I saw that my dad, he unfortunately, didn't have a congregation that could pay his salary, so he had to go out and work as a result of that. So I grew up under that influence, of my dad. He was a minister of a small church. And in the 50s, his name was all over the radio. He had a thriving plastering business, contracting plastering business, where he hired African Americans and gave them an opportunity to be a part of unions and get good paying, skilled jobs. And I remember one day, I was probably like 8 years old, and we were at the dinner table. I was watching my dad write these checks. And at that time, $125 net a week was a whole lot of money. And so as we said, Papa, what did they do with all that money? And he just kind of laughed. His son, one of these days that you'll know. But as a result of that, I grew up under that kind of influence. At that time also, he started cooperative economics amongst the church members and other churches that we worship with, and had them to invest in what we call the Jubilee Diversified Investors Fund. And as a result of that, I saw firsthand cooperative economics and how it worked, just like that. But later on, I became in the insurance industry at an Allstate insurance office, and I grew it into one of the largest in Superior, California. And that grew from Sacramento up to the Oregon border. But as a result of that, I saw the need and necessity for more cooperative economics in our community. And so that's how I got started. And another thing I'd like to say is that it's very important to do what you want to do and have the freedom to do what you want to do. Economics, wealth gives you options. Wealth gives you the opportunity to get through hard times. Wealth gives you the opportunity to take risks. So as a result of that, you can, especially in America as an entrepreneurial society that we're in now, it gives you the opportunity to take risks. And also, it gives you the ability to leave generational wealth to your family members. And so that's David Fontaine in a nutshell.
Thank you. I feel like we both have very intersectional work in this respect, because I did see that chapter about the Black church being one of the most important financial institutions in the Black community. And I actually used one of your chapters as a site for a paper I did in grad school about Nannie Helen Burroughs. And since we are in DC, I definitely had to talk about Nannie Helen Burroughs. So if you would like to start us off with sharing some of the histories of different co-ops that you found, but particularly the one with Nannie Helen Burroughs.
So yeah, one of the things I found was the 1930s and 40s was a prolific period for Black co-ops. And we can imagine, of course, one of the reasons is survival, right? This was the Great Depression. And there was there were very few other options, and things were worse than ever for Black folks. But also it turned out the 1930s were a period of time when you had strong Black organizations promoting cooperatives. You had Black people talking with each other about what are our options and how can we do things even when capitalism isn't working. What can we do, and how can we move together? And Nannie Helen Burroughs, you all know, right? She's well known for her work with her church work, right? She's well known for starting a school for women and girls. But what we didn't know that much until I was able, actually, it was a colleague of mine who was an historian who was doing a biography of her, who said to me, "Oh, you're interested in co-ops, you should hear about the Northeast Co-op, which then became Cooperative Industries of DC, that Nannie Helen Burroughs was a co-founder of." And when you look through her history and then how she started this co-op, it's really fascinating because she was looking at all she'd already accomplished, right? She'd already done the things we know her for. This was early 1930s. The Depression is upon us. And she's looking at what's happening to Black women, right? She was already disturbed about domestic work, that Black women were mostly in domestic work, right? It was unsafe, it didn't pay well. So education in one way was to get them out of that, but she was also worried about the people who couldn't get out of that kind of work. What alternatives do we have? And she realized we could do worker co-ops. Women could run their own sewing co-ops, canneries. I think she had them making chairs, etc., and own the business together, run it, and work in it, and make better wages, be safer, right, and do this instead of domestic work. So she started to promote that. They started, as I said, I think it was the Northeast Cooperative something, but then they changed the name to Cooperative Industries of BC because they were doing a variety of industries. She made space in the basement of her school available for the co-ops so that she addressed she lowered the costs of starting them and that kind of thing. But the other thing that she did is she connected with the larger co-op movement. She became a member of the Cooperative League of the USA DC chapter. In fact, became one of the most famous spokespeople for that. She also tapped into FDR, was starting what was called the Self-Help Cooperative Initiative through the Department of Commerce. She applied every year until she got the grant for her co-op to qualify. And after 3 years, her co-op qualified, so then they bought a farm in Maryland in order to do food security as well as employment. And so they ended up being one of our first examples of what we call now a hybrid or a solidarity co-op, where you have a worker co-op and a consumer co-op with the farming and the consuming of the food and bringing the produce to the city from outside. But still you had the basis of her co-op was women working, doing their own work, running their own companies, doing their own production, right? These are, as I said, sewing, canning, making chairs. They were literally doing production. Which gives you better wages than domestic work, but also they were in charge of their own work. So it's kind of mind-boggling to me that such a fascinating example people ignored, right? And even in the telling of her life, most of the time we don't hear that aspect of what she did. The other thing that's also interesting when you look at who she was working with, Carter G. Woodson was on the board for a while. Chancellor Williams took over being chair of the co-op systems board for a while. So she was also connected with people that we all know, again, names that we all know and stuff. But who knew that they also were doing this, right? And that she was connecting. So that's what I'm saying, that these are the kinds of things I found. So that's one example of the kind of things I found. Another example would be the Colored Merchants Association, which actually started in the 1920s. That was started by the Negro Business League, which again we think of as very conservative, right? But this was a co-op of independent Black grocers from around the country. And they formed a co-op, what we call a secondary level co-op, a co-op that would help them with their marketing, help them buy in bulk, help them with distribution, so that they could compete with the new grocery chain stores that were coming up, A&P and that kind of thing. So again, this was a way you could still honor Black entrepreneurship and sole proprietorship, but support it and develop it more through a co-op. And that was another interesting story of intersections again, because I found a short news article about it where they were trying to decide on a logo. They had a contest. And who was on the judge committee? Suddenly, again, all these famous Black folks, W.E.B. Du Bois, the head of the North Carolina insurance company at that time, right? And people also that you heard don't speak to each other. Like Du Bois wasn't supposed to speak to the Black business people, but they were all sitting on this judge committee to make a logo, to choose a logo for the co-op. So that's another interesting example. If you want to fast forward to the 60s and 70s, which is another prolific period, we had SNCC doing co-ops and credit unions throughout the South. Again, recognizing that it wasn't enough to do civil rights and to have voting rights, but we had to figure out how to eliminate poverty, how to put money in Black folks' hands through credit unions, how to do their own co-ops in order to, again, first survive through farming or small business and do it collectively, pool your money collectively. But also then, when you own things collectively, you develop new skills, better ways to work together, better opportunities, right? More economies of scale, so that your small entrepreneurship collectively with other people's give you more benefits. So we saw increase in incomes, increase in leadership and capacity building, because people were in charge of their own economic activities, and it gave them a way to do more than just survive, but to actually thrive in this world. The 60s also saw the Black Panthers used co-ops. Again, we don't hear that much about that, but they had co-ops and collectives in most of their chapters. And in Jackson, Mississippi, we had a group that started craft co-ops and worker co-ops and a consumer co-op in the early 70s, again, as a way to make sure there was work for people. So really, any period of time, I found some kind of at least mutual aid, if not some kind of economic collective activity. And then often there were these businesses that were actually legally incorporated as a co-op. But also the same successes over and over again about empowering people, addressing their poverty, giving them economic stability, giving them more leadership, abilities to amass some wealth because they actually owned an asset, an economic asset. They weren't just working for somebody else anymore. Access to healthy food, access to better ability to farm your land or to even own farmland, all those kinds of benefits. I don't know if you want some more examples, but we can go back to those.
Okay. Thank you. Wow, those are amazing examples. And David, seriously, in your book is, like Jessica just mentioned, literally capacity building. Like, your book is telling people, this is what you need to do for this. And I like the way that it's laid out, because it's very much so like, you got a question, go to that page. And so what was the intention behind this? Like, what have you seen in the Black community? And what are some examples that you've seen in the Black community that we would require these skills, that we need this capacity built?
Well, one of the things that I always think of is that right now, many of us are doing well. Some of us are doing well. We have a few Black billionaires. We have many millionaires. But what we don't think about or talk about is that we still have 1/8 the wealth of the white community, where our median wealth is $24,100 versus $189,000 for the white community. It's estimated that by the year 2053, that half of African Americans will not have any wealth at all. Zero. One of the things that really scares me, that frightens me, is artificial intelligence and what it will do to our workforce, because most of the jobs that will be eliminated as a result of artificial intelligence are low-skilled jobs. And it's estimated by the year 2035 that more than 80 to 90 million jobs could be lost as a result of artificial intelligence. That's a fourth quarter of the workforce. That means they'll have to be doing something else. And the something else that you must be doing, they're highly technical skill jobs that require the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So we have to gear our workforce, the new workforce, if we're going to be aware of this, to combat artificial intelligence. Also, I'm looking at the federal government presently has a $37 trillion debt, and our deficit is running $1.5 trillion a year. And so that means that there won't be the type of programs coming from government in the future that we may have had the benefit of being a part of in the past. And so as a result of that, what I was thinking about in my book basically talks about how to make money, which means how to invest, how to save, how to work together with others in making money. It also talks about how to protect your money, which means that you may have a financial goal, specific financial goal, but if you have that specific financial goal and you're disabled, that can ruin your plans. So you need income replacement to replace that income so you can continue on to work on your goals. You also need, of course, you need life insurance. So again, if something happens to you, you want to make sure your family is still provided for, and you want to make sure that that your financial goals can still be obtained. Third, I talk about how to pass that wealth on. And so we're talking about wills and trust. And I talk about entrepreneurship in my book, and the need for greater entrepreneurship. America, this country, we're an entrepreneurial country. We're the only country in the world that as a corporation, you can commit a crime and pay a fine and get away with it. That's really the only thing. You can pay a $200, $300 million fine and get away with it. So it actually promotes, in some instances, as a result of profit, because you can make more profit than you can than the fine is you don't have to pay. So those are all critically important factors that I try to bring out in my book and try to address.
So I realized I got excited about the history of Black co-ops, and I didn't even get to let people know what is a co-op. We gotta let them know what's a co-op. Because when David mentioned insurance companies, I know that you said that in your book, insurance companies were one of the first businesses, formal Black business co-ops that were formed. Is that correct?
So mutual insurance companies are co-ops, but not other for-profit insurance companies. So the mutuals are the ones where every plan holder, what do you call it? Every policy, thank you. Where every policy holder, mutuals are where every policy holder actually is a co-owner, and you share in the surplus. So mutual insurance companies are one of the first formalized mutual aid societies where everyone pooled their resources and then helped whoever in the group that pooled the resources needed it. So, and they're considered cooperatives because of that that level, that everybody who deposits or has a policy holder is a member, just like a credit union is a cooperative, a financial cooperative. Everybody, and some people who are in credit unions don't know it, but everybody who has at least $5 in a savings account in a credit union is a member. That credit union has a right to vote for the board of directors, to attend the annual meeting and vote on policies and that kind of thing, and then has access to the credit union's purpose is to provide access to affordable financial services and to support their members in access to credit and that kind of thing. So a co-op is any kind of business formally incorporated by at least 3 people, has to be at least 3 people, and different from a stock ownership company. Some co-ops don't actually even issue stock, but in a co-op, the stock ownership does not determine how much voice you have. It's the fact that you're a member or not. So if you take the credit union's base, as long as you paid your put $5 in a savings account, you're a member of that co-op, of that credit union. That gives you the rights, what they call one person, one vote, the right to vote during any annual meetings on any policies, to vote for the board of directors, etc. Instead of, if you own stock, right, it's about how much stock you own, so it's about how much money you put in. And so in a co-op, you also get out, not how much money you put in, but how much you participate in the co-op. It doesn't mean that if you invest, in every co-op, you still have to put in some equity, so you still buy either a share or they just call it equity. So everybody puts in something, but it's about pooling those resources in order to make sure that everybody can get the service or the product that you created the co-op for. But once you put that in, you will get interest or whatever on your investment, on your equity. So that's again like a business owner, and you get a return on your equity, and you get a return profit. You get some distribution of the profit back if the business is profitable. All that is decided by all the members together. So the members together decide how much money gets redistributed back to each member, how much money stays in the business to be used for inventory and for upgrades and that kind of thing, how much pay, right? So instead of the small, 99 not 1% who gets to make all the decisions. In the co-op, it's everybody, the membership who gets to make the decision. The other thing that's about the co-op is it's part of an international system which recognizes that there's 7 principles of how to operate a human-based, values-based business. So I don't know if I remember them all. Autonomy is one, this one person, one vote is one, this return to your participation rather than return on your investment. Specifically, there's continuous education, because in order to democratically participate in a business, you have to be educated about it and understand how it works. Oh, and democratic participation is the one person, one vote part. There's the continuous education, there's giving back to your community, there's cooperating with other co-ops. So these value-based, collectively owned businesses operate according to that instead of profit maximization. They still obviously are businesses, so they have to make more money. They have to net more than they bring in, right? So they still have to have profits. The co-ops call them surplus because they're not a profit maximizing. So they still have to get surplus in order to stay in business, but that's not the purpose of the business. Whereas the purpose of a stock ownership investment corporation is to make profits and to make the owners as wealthy as possible. But what we've been talking about is you don't have to, wealth doesn't just come from being a stock owner or an investor in a stock company, right? There's wealth that we can get by being involved in community-run and based businesses that are thriving and successful that help their members. Members still can earn profit from being in those kind of co-op businesses, but also the collective wealth, collective well-being of pooling your resources to satisfy everybody's needs, to create goods and services that aren't otherwise provided, right? We can think about wealth in that way also. And in ways that shared wealth, because remember again, pooling your resources gives everybody more access to things, which then gives them more stability as well as more prosperity. Did I explain it well enough?
Absolutely. David, you wanted to comment?
Yeah. Jessica, I am so happy you are here. Just jog my memory about something. Fortunately, I was brought up in a church, and this church purchased property for the membership in the 30s in Princess Anne, Maryland. And the other place where they purchased over 1,000 acres was in Coshocton, Ohio. And nobody wanted the land then. It was depression. Nobody wanted the land and think you could do anything about it. So they purchased it. Nobody said, why'd they buy that land? That land has oil, coal. So I was brought up, and I guess being so close to it, I kind of took it for granted. That just happens. We had 2 churches. But my point is this here, is that the churches in our community take in over $12 billion a year. Most of that is not invested in African American credit unions or banks. Most of that goes to institutions that we derive very little benefit from. We have what you call the multiplier effect in economics. That means if you spend $1, it creates additional $4 or $5 in wealth. So if you have some of those ties of those 80,000 churches go to legitimate and good causes. But if a portion of the tithes that are given every Sunday was invested back in our neighborhoods, invested back in our community, it would be have a tremendous economic impact as a result of that. To be more specific about that, and there are some churches that are dealing with this, is that our homeowner rate is 42% versus 72% of the white community. 50% of African Americans' wealth come from home ownership, their home, but all the wealth that they have. Also, 75% of all Black business owners who start their business, comes from obtained equity in their home. So home ownership is a critical component that our churches can work for and do targeted strategic investments. But I tell people that I also talk about in my book the specific steps that the churches could do. And I tell people, if your church doesn't have an economic or cooperative development arm, you need to ask the pastor about maybe we can get one. If your fraternity or if your sorority doesn't have an economic development component, then you should ask the membership or ask the leadership, what can we do about that? Because with us having 1/8 the wealth of the majority community, there is much that can be done, but you have to take the leadership and you have to be aggressive and intentional. One of the things that I really believe in is that I try to practice. You have to be very intentional and strategic about what you do. One of the things that I advocate is that one out of every that third or fourth time that you go out to eat, make sure it's at an African American establishment. Just 1 out of 4, 1 out of 3. That's not 100%. It's like where your priorities. If your money tells you where your priorities are, and if the priorities at your church is gifting for the pastor, that's maybe not a church that you want to necessarily be associated with. You want some correction there as a result of that. But so the church is very, very important. The civil rights movement would not have been successful without the Black church, without the moral authority, without the troops, the shock troops, the children that went on the marches. You hear about the leadership, but you don't hear about all the people getting beat up in the streets. They got hosed. So as a result of that, the church is our preeminent institution still. It doesn't have the leverage and it doesn't have the influence that it once has, but it's still the preeminent institution in our community. And so if we're to turn and make a gap, a difference in that wealth building component, our churches and our other institutions must have strategic, targeted programs to deal with the major wealth gap that we have.
Yeah, you're reminding me of a couple of things. First, I did find a lot of the early co-ops were started in churches and with church groups, partly because people trusted each other and partly because they were already used to exchanging money in those forums. But churches did start credit unions, they did start consumer co-ops like food co-ops and things like that. And so it's very interesting to look at that connection. And again, I think people are already used to sharing money and then seeing that collectively, they already know sort of collectively what else they can achieve looking at it that way. I just 2 weeks ago was at a conference where I learned about this new initiative called the Black Church Food Security Initiative, headquartered in Baltimore. And they're actually trying to work with Black churches throughout the country to pool resources to start food co-ops, support farming, and that kind of thing to make sure to address food insecurity in Black communities. So again, using the affinities that we already have to then branch out into more formal ways to do cooperation. But the other thing you reminded me of is this, why do we only have 1/8 of the wealth, right? And, the mythology is, of course, that we're too lazy to work right, we don't save, right? But actually, again, all the data shows that when you match people the same income, Black people actually save more than white people. So it's not that we're not saving, it's that we don't have, our income levels, there's not enough match on the income levels. And so some of us who've been looking at the wealth gap are also trying to look at the policies of asset stripping that have created the wealth gap, right? So first we were, dragged here on slave ships, right? And for 300 or 400 years, we didn't even own our own bodies. So we didn't even have a leg up. In fact, other people were making wealth off of selling us and working us to death. And so, you know, I can't have a conversation about wealth without talking about reparations. And I also, I didn't talk about it yet, but in the book I also talk about the sabotage against Black co-ops from white supremacist terrorism, white competition, unfair competition. And so I did write an article after this book came out about that we need to add the sabotage against co-ops as part of our case for reparations, right? Because with co-ops, we had a chance to own land, to get some wealth, et cetera, but even some of those, even though we have successful cases, we also had a lot of cases that were thwarted, not because of anything we did, but because white folks either burned them down, lynched their members, denied them bank loans, all kinds of things like that. So I also said, part of reparations is about making sure that Black communities can go back, have the education and the money to start more co-ops and to do more with co-ops. And so I was arguing that some of the reparations money that I think we should get should go back into community wealth building in terms of co-op education, non-extractive co-op loan funds, that kind of thing, so we could actually rebuild that co-op side of our community.
Did you want to go into more of the challenges? Because I was actually about to ask that question.
I would just like to say this here, is that I'm a firm believer that we can't rely on any outside forces to do what needs to be done. We have to rely on ourselves. You can't expect people who are profiting from you and making a living from you to institute policies that's going to better your lives when they're taking money out of their pocket. That's very important. But when I wrote this book, I had the idea that we must do for self. We can't expect help from anybody else. But there is a professor, Professor Derek Alexander at the New School in New York City, and he brought a proposal to help correct that wealth gap. He called it baby bonds. Yeah. And what would happen is that when the child is born, they get a certain amount of money. By the time they were 18, they would have, I think it was $50,000 to $75,000, which the wealth gap is right now is let's see, about 160. That might be half of that. So there are things taking place, but he did it primarily for African Americans. But politically, that wasn't going to work, and that never was going to get through. So I believe it's the Connecticut or the Massachusetts legislature who have brought that forth, and we're trying to deal with that. Well, we're trying to do reparations, but there's only 6% Black folks in California. Some people don't realize 6%. So basically, that's political suicide in California. Because I don't care how liberal you think California is. They still, as a majority of the white folks, still didn't vote for Barack Obama after 8 years. So that tells you a whole lot there. But so it's we have to have self-reliance and do for ourselves, and we cannot rely on that coming from anything else. And as far as reparations, I did see it, I must say, had a very low threshold as far as getting approval and believing that it could be passed in California. And those numbers have really come up as a result of education and as a result of the focus on it. And so it's a possibility. It's where a place I didn't think it would ever be. So it's a lot more than what I thought it would. But personally, I think we have to rely on ourselves, and we can't rely on anybody else as a result of that.
So I have pulled a quote from your book, but this question is for both of you. You said in the 1800s, the concept of Black capitalism was a strategy of racial economic solidarity and cooperation. So how would you compare the ethos of Black capitalism from back then to right now? Because even though there are it seems like there are pockets of people still doing this type of work, still trying to create co-ops, still trying to do mutual aid funds, still trying to make sure the collective is all right. But now that we do have Black billionaires, we have a lot of Black millionaires, we have a lot of Black front-facing people that are talking about money and their wealth, but they're not necessarily like, yeah, let's put everybody on. They're like, nah, it's me. I'm the one. So where do you think that stopped? Like where did the communalism stop when it came to our economic path?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's hard. So I think the quote that you're taking right was in the 1800s, right? That notion that we could become capitalists as a group, right? So we had a lot of these joint stock ownership companies that, in the early 20th century, the UNIA, the Garveyites also did this too. Let's pool our all resources in terms of we'll buy stock, $5 shares of stock, and we'll have a shipping company, we'll have a clothing factory. And they thought, right, capitalism, because think about it, capitalism is the system, right? So if you want to be part of the system, you're not necessarily going to try to do an alternative. You want to be in the system, right? And so the notion was if we all own these capitalist companies together, that's how we can get rich. But I think what happened, well, we know what happened with the Garveyites, right? He was targeted and deported, and the treasury took away all the assets. But again, what happened was capitalism, I don't think is enough, and sometimes I talk about it's the wrong strategy, right? Because if we're talking about raising everybody and eliminating poverty, capitalism unfortunately doesn't do that because it's a profit maximizing. And how do you maximize profits? You have to reduce your costs. And what are your costs of business? Labor. And the ecology, actually, right? And natural resources. So you're exploiting both human beings and natural resources to make your profits. And that's not a sustainable, that's not a 7th generation sustainability model, right? And we see that it hasn't worked for Black folks. So even though we tried it because we wanted to be in the mainstream, and then some made it, right? But in terms of, again, if we're trying to lift everybody, if we're trying to eliminate poverty, we've got to go back to these strategies where everybody's a winner, right? Where it's not profit, it's surplus that you're maximizing. Surplus in the sense of so everybody can prosper, can do better, so everybody's business can get better. And that's where collective, cooperative businesses, that kind of thing, can fit better. And I think for Black folks, what happened is when they get in the business cycles, right, they put all their money, all their hopes into being a capitalist, but then a business cycle comes, everything gets, right, goes downhill, like the Great Depression, like the Depression of the 1880s, right, you lose everything. But again, when we study co-ops actually sometimes thrive and definitely survive crises, economic crises. Again, because you pool resources, because you're not trying to maximize profits, you're trying to maximize access. Co-ops start during crises, but also co-ops in crises last better, last through them, et cetera, better. So I think that's the other reason. So you see these efforts to be in Black capitalism go down, every 20-year cycle. They go under or whatever, but the co-op can stay or can be, it's more flexible. You can reorganize it. And so there's more possibilities and more prosperity in the co-op model.
Wow. That's deep.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. I believe it all gets back to the individual or the person and how they're brought up, how they're raised, what influences are around them. So I think in this society, capitalist society, people die every day trying to just get here because they realize there's an opportunity here. America is the only place, again, if you're in business and in capitalist society, you can, every dollar you spend, you can write it off. So I think one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of immigrant groups, Africans, Jamaicans, they have embraced capitalism. And as a result of embracing it, all that she said is right. They're trying to maximize profit. But I think that looking at people like, I think it's Smith, who did the donation, paid all the tuition to of the scholars of the students at Morehouse University. So I would like to think that we, as a Black man, I'll just say this. I've had people say that I wouldn't know what to do if I had $20 billion or $30 billion or $40 billion. I tell them, I said, I would know what to do with all of it. Because there's a lot that needs to be done and can be done. You know. So I guess basically what I'm trying to say, it comes down to the person. And that's why it's critically important that we have family. You have a mother or dad, whether they're in the house or not, that gives you certain values, whether you have institutions and around you that give you certain inspiration and transmits to you certain values. So when you get into those positions of authority, you're always looking for a way for it to benefit your people. There's always going to be certain, everybody's involved, everybody's valuable. And there's always going to be some people that may be here, there, but they're all valuable, they're all necessary, they're all needed. And so that goes back to is that it's up to us to make sure that when we get people in those places, that they have the right kind of attitude and they will do the right thing. Because you can leverage this American capitalism to do a lot of good for a lot of people. But you're still going to have capitalism always.
Okay, I don't want to take up all the questions. I do want to allow audience to have questions, but I will ask this one last question to both of you. What did you both want the Black community to walk away with after reading your books?
So I wanted people to know that the cooperative strategy works and that Black people have a legacy, that we've done it, we can keep doing it, we can do it again, and that it's not something alien to us. But I also wanted people to understand how we did it well. So to look at lessons learned and where the strengths of the model lie. And so that, I'll just quickly mention that, right? Some of the things that I found that mattered, that the co-ops that lasted the longest or the strongest, had very strong education component. And I don't mean formal education, but learning together, learning about the co-op model, learning about the business, continuously learning together, kept the co-ops strong. And I've got lots of fantastic examples of communities that even started co-op courses in the night school, the adult school in their neighborhood and things like that, to make sure people knew the model and understood the model. Also, I found, I think I mentioned this one, strong Black organizations that were promoting co-ops, helping to do the co-op education and connecting. Because again, we need also that trust, right? And so having groups that you already trust, groups that you're already in that you trust, or groups that you do trust, having strong Black organizations mattered a lot. But also having what we're calling now an ecosystem of co-ops. So having interlocking co-ops, a credit union and a farm store and housing co-ops and some other kind of co-ops, right? So the more co-ops working together matter, because also that's where you get some of that multiplier effect, right? The money stays, recirculates in your community, stays in your community. You're satisfying a variety of needs through co-ops. You're supplying one co-op from another co-op. So all those examples where we had, sometimes they were called Black co-op societies. Buffalo, New York had it. Baltimore, Philadelphia, Richmond, Virginia, Gary, Indiana. They all had these co-op societies, which started with one co-op, but within 4 years they had 2 or 3 other interlocking co-ops that the same members were in, but it was solving a different issue. And those were able to support each other. Sometimes the credit union could help with the financing for another co-op, things like that. So I think understanding again that we can do it and that the collectiveness is sort of encompassing, right? It's not just we do this one piece together, but we learn together, we build other co-ops together, we work in communities. There was a strong role for Black women, so recognizing and allowing Black women to do what we do made a big difference. Involving young people made a big difference because then it was more sustainable, right? We had new energy and young people coming into it. It didn't just become obsolete with the elders, that kind of thing. So there are a lot about things that were already sort of in our culture, efforts, and the co-ops themselves stronger and worth doing and replicating.
Basically, there is a lot of hopelessness, pain, and suffering in our community. And there's a desire for a lot of people to do the right thing. But they just want to have the skill to do it. What I wanted to do in my book is say, this is a book. If you want to learn how to invest, if you want to learn how to save, if you want to learn how to buy real estate, if you want, it was a book of hope. I mean, that's kind of, it's a book that you can get an actual skill, and there's a plan, there's a strategic way, and there's a way that you don't have to live hopelessness. Today, all you need to start a business is a service and a product and a computer and a website, and you're in business with the world. For $1,000 or $1,500, you're in business with the world. So that's what I wanted to do, to give people hope, give them a tool. If you wanted to be an entrepreneur, if you wanted your church to do better, if you want your family to do better, here are some ideas and some ways that you can do that.
Thank you both so much. Everybody give them a round of applause, please. I'd like to open up the floor for questions. I'll pass the mic around. Does anyone have any questions?
I will have a question about, thank you, my name is Kamal Grimes. I work here at Sankofa as well. My question is about co-ops. Are you familiar with the co-op called the Mondragon? How did they become so successful, and what do you know about them that we could possibly learn from?
Sure, I didn't pay you to ask that question. I've also written about that. So the Mondragon, it's a city in northern Spain, but the whole area is what's called an area of Basque, which is an ethnic minority in Spain. Actually, they consider themselves like the oldest European tribe or whatever. During when was it, the 40s and 50s, under the dictatorship of Franco, they started their first co-op because a priest, a Catholic priest, who was sort of a precursor to liberation theology, started a school. They didn't have a polytechnical high school in Mondragon. So he started a community-owned polytechnical high school because the closest high school was not allowing their Basque children to attend it. And they ran it collectively, and he started teaching about cooperative economics. 6 of the graduates, the first graduates of that polytechnical program, were then encouraged to start their own co-op. And he also was smart enough, and this was in 1956 or something, to say, let's go into production, right? Let's not do services, let's do production, because production has a better return. And so they actually created a factory, I think it was a stove factory or something like that. A worker co-op, so the workers owned it themselves, the 6 young people started it themselves. And then the priests started talking more and more about we can use this model to benefit ourselves and to get around the fact that Franco was not, was oppressing them. He wasn't letting them go to school, they didn't have a bank, that kind of thing. So they started a few more worker co-ops, and then they started a credit union. And they did something very interesting with their credit union, which I haven't seen in most places, is their credit union was an engine of growth. It had a research and development arm. It did development grants to help start new co-ops. It helped new co-ops to figure out what business to go into, et cetera. And so within about 20 years, they had about 20 interlocking worker co-ops. They had the banking system through their credit union. They had their credit union developing co-ops and doing the research and development about what industries to go in, what were going to be the most lucrative, et cetera. Also because Spanish law considered people in worker co-ops to be independent owners. They weren't part of the new social security system. So again, their credit social security system for their region and for their members. And then they started a school system. They now have a whole K through university, K through bachelor's degree, cooperative university and cooperative schools in their community. I think they have now 120 worker co-ops. They also started a consumer co-op for a department store and food store, and they also own some companies outside of the Basque region. So again, they were able to do this ecosystem of support, right, between worker co-ops, financing, schools. So education was really critical. Picking this growth model based on having factories, right, worker-owned factories. And then using the other growth model of using the credit union as the anchor for community development.
I have a follow-up question.
My follow-up question would be for people who want to start a co-op today and may be concerned about maybe profit. You said surplus, or what would they make? Also, like decision-making, how long will it take to make a decision if you have 10, 20, 50 owners? And also, my question is about, if you become a worker, say you're hired later, do you then become an owner at the same time, or is it only the people who started it are the owners?
It's a lot of technical questions. I'll give you an overview, but there's two places here in DC, Beloved Communities Incubator, which does co-op development and organizing neighborhood equity, One DC. We also do some co-op education and training, so you can get more details about it. But with worker co-ops, all worker co-ops have a structure for how to bring in new people. Usually it's like a 6-month, you work for about 6 months, and then if you're interested in becoming an owner after that, you can. So you don't have to be a founder to become an owner. They have a succession plan, they have a plan. One of the things a lot of the worker co-ops learn from the Mondragon system, again, is what's called individual accounts. So as a worker owner, you do have to put in that equity, I said. I'll give you an example of Cooperative Home Care Associates in New York City, which started in 1987. It's still existing. It's actually the largest worker co-op in the United States. It has over about 1,700 employees, and about half to 2/3 of them are employee owners. The entrance fee is, I think it's still $1,000, but you pay it in installments out of your first paychecks. So for the first year or so of your employment, you're paying off. You don't have to have the $1,000 to join. But every year that they've been in business, after the first 2 years, they've been so successful that they give back 25% on your equity. So every year you get $250 back. Your equity stays in the company, but you get a dividend back of $250. So you're already making money. And the $1,000 you put in is put in what's called an individual account. It stays in the business until you leave, but it stays as your account and creates interest. So you have that equity, but also you get these bonuses, plus you're still getting your salary, right? And the whole point of Cooperative Home Care Associates was to create quality home care jobs in an industry that didn't value home care. So they actually were able, they pay living wages, members have a retirement plan, they have health care, health coverage, they're part of they're members of the SCIU, 1099 union in New York City. So they're unionized, they have health benefits, vacation benefits, retirement benefits, and they have living wages, all in a very, low wage work. And anybody, can join if they have jobs, right? But they have a process where you wait like 6 months after you become a member. You do have to be voted in by the other members. But there is a way that they continue, and that's how they've been growing. They've also grown because they've added 2 different industries. They have a disabilities franchise where they do specialize in disabilities home care, and then I forget what their second franchise is. They also have a nonprofit training to do their own training, and so some of their members have job ladder opportunities to go and become trainers or to get nursing degrees and so increase themselves that way. So it's a great model because it has all those options. And I can't remember what the other part of your question was.
No, you answered the question.
Okay.
Oh, it was just how do you encourage people who maybe want to start a co-op to just, if they're concerned about, the money that they may make versus starting a traditional corporation.
For home care, cooperative home care, you do better than if you just sold yourself to one of the companies that does home care, right? You get better training, you get better wages, you're an owner. As I said, it's been a profitable business so that you get your dividend every year. So you can show, I usually find that telling stories about the co-ops that exist and what they're able to do for their members makes a huge difference to help people see what's possible and why they might want to do that model instead of either work for somebody else or even trying to work on their own by themselves, right?
Someone in the comments online mentioned Kuumba Ola, Nini Anna Wallace Francis.
Oh, I don't know.
These are apparently examples of successful, lasting Black cooperative models.
Oh, great. No, I don't even know those. Wow.
I think somebody else
did.
In the US or those are somewhere else?
These, that's a good question. It says Kuumba Ola, and I think that it's by the person Nini Anna Wallace Francis.
Huh.
And somebody else wrote Casico Doce Ibas. I don't know if that's a familiar co-op to you.
Okay. There may be some of the co-ops being incubated by Beloved Communities Incubator here in DC. Maybe that's what
they
they're
said
responding to.
it's actually, these are names of people in the Virgin Islands of the
Oh,
US
Virgin
who are
Islands.
working to starting a cooperative.
Oh, wow. I see
Awesome.
some other hands. Howard shirt, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'll let the young lady go first.
Oh, okay.
So much. Hi, thank you both so much. My name is Bathsheba Philpott, and my question, going back to I think you said a cooperative, like home care project that you mentioned, how much would be needed to start an effort like that? I'm just kind of get a general sense of like what resources would, you need to start something like that.
So this is not my forte. It depends on how big you want to start, right? If you're starting with 5 people or 20 people, right? The thing with home care, right, is it has low capitalization, right? You don't need a lot of equipment, right? It's more about the training, right? So a lot of the money is for training. But what I will say in terms of startup costs, there are right now in the United States a lot of opportunities for what we call non-extractive financing for startup. So either getting grants or getting forgivable loans to do this work. So there's a national system called the Seed Commons Local Co-op Loan Funds. Bread in Baltimore is one of the bigger branches. We're just starting a branch here in DC. They're all over the country. If you can give them a good business plan and work with a co-op lawyer, and there's also a growing number of co-op lawyers. There's now at least 10 Black co-op lawyers in the US that I know. So you've got the technical assistance on the co-op, on the legal side. There's lots of education programs, and then we do have these non-extractive loan funds. There's another group, Shared Capital, in Minneapolis that does loans, the Co-op Fund of New England. So there's a lot of places, especially the co-op technical assistance people, can put you in touch with these loan funds. And some of them, when I say non-extractive, it means that it's a forgivable loan if you go under. You only pay it back if you show that you can afford to pay it back and when you can afford to pay it back. Or you can get some grants. There's also some interesting models of how you can pair with a nonprofit and get grants to do the education and some of the training. And then there's also what we call peer-to-peer trainers. And so you get people who are already in worker co-ops who want to help other people to learn, and you can pair with them and get training that way.
Thank you so much.
Yes, we're in a nice ecosystem right now. It's a lot of work.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, good evening. I heard the gentleman speak of the Mondragon, I probably didn't pronounce it correctly, system. I've heard of that, and I think it's even in Senegal as well. And you mentioned the many benefits of this. So being a political or economic theorist, as you said, if this is more beneficial for people and it's clearly seen, shouldn't this business model naturally approach or eclipse the types of business models over equity ownership? Or I don't actually know the data, maybe it's the most popular, but I don't think so. So wouldn't it naturally grow if everyone sees that benefit or sees the incentives, and
You would think.
why not?
Sabotage.
That simple?
No, it's not that simple, but because we live in a capital-centric society, our whole world really, right? It's hard to get the news out that co-ops work because the capitalist world is a naysayer, right? They say, oh, it's too hard to have people make joint decisions. Oh, that was another question that somebody asked that I didn't answer. There's a lot of training about how to make decisions together and that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of naysayers, right? We don't teach this, right, in school. When we think about teaching entrepreneurship, almost all the time we only teach capitalist entrepreneurship, right? So those junior achieving programs are all about how one, the Horatio Alger Mish, how one kid could do this and make it big, and they don't train you about the other things. So I think one is ideology, right? Remember from the 50s, all co-op stuff was considered communist, and so there was, red baiting. And so people, especially in the 60s, Black folks didn't even talk about doing co-ops, even though they were doing it. They didn't publicize it because it was too dangerous, right? And then, as I said, I have a whole history of this different kinds of sabotage between actually lynching co-op members, burning down co-ops, not giving loans, raising the rent so high that a co-op can't operate anymore. So all kinds of those things. But I think it's mostly that we don't have any training or information. People don't have the information, and then they're told, the assumption is that collectives are too burdensome, too cumbersome, when they're actually more flexible if you look at the data.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, I'll keep it quick, but ideology without results needs to be enforced. So I don't know if I accept that the ideology is now, like the gentleman said, people are crawling to get into the US. So meaning results show, no matter the ideology, people will have a natural affinity to what works for them. So I don't need to know
what works, right? The media also makes people think that capitalism is working,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And actually, to tell you the truth, the fastest growing worker co-ops are with immigrant women of color and immigrant people. So the immigrants aren't all coming here to be capitalists. A lot of them are coming here because our capitalism ruined their economies and they have no other choices but to come here, and our capitalism made their dictatorships prey on them, and they're coming here for protection, right? So a lot of they're coming here is not just because our model looks so good, but it's also about the marketing. And they,
So it's not the results, it's just the stories.
I mean, when we look at the results, and I'm an economist, when you look at the results, co-ops pretty much come out on top. But it's hard, but they're a little bit harder, right? You have to be more deliberate about it, you have to do more education, and a lot of places don't have that energy, patience. The education isn't there, the energy and the patience isn't there. But if you do look at the results, it's, first of all, small businesses have high failure rates. That like 80% of them fail in the first year, and only 5% are in still in business after 5 years. And co-ops have the opposite. Co-ops are 80% are still in business after 5 years. But again, it's the messaging. I don't think you can ignore that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
David, did you have a question?
The only thing I would
say that I'm thinking about the fight by conservatives right now to ban books in school.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime you get something that's working, they don't want to know about people to know about our history. They have a plan after they saw what Black Lives Matter did, and as a result of the killing, they said we got to do something about this. This is way too far. These people really believe they can do these things. So they came up with a specific strategy to fight that kind of education and kind of Black history and learning about. We had the richest neighborhood in Sacramento County. The kids were out on the street marching. That had never happened, and they were frightened of that. So as a result of that, anytime you have something that works against capital, they will come up and they have think tanks that come up with ideas to eliminate it and to smash it. So you were so true. And like I said, it's a result of the book and something else as well.
Thank you, and thank you to both of you for your intellectual contribution to our knowledge and helping us to understand many of these complex issues in our community. You may have already answered the question in response to the brother's question to you, but I'll ask it nonetheless. So one of our ancestors, Chancellor Williams, wrote the book, The Destruction of Black Civilization. So the question, and I'll start with you, the question I have is, with many of the examples that you gave, Marcus Garvey, Elijah Muhammad, buying farmland in Georgia and places like that, the Black Panther Party, many of those, what would you say in your research you found to be one of the single ingredients or methods to destroy some of these co-ops? And you mentioned that people were in co-ops and didn't even know. I think David kind of mentions it being a part of his church. He was a part of a co-op and didn't even realize that that's actually what it was. What would you say to that? And then David, the question I have of you is Dr. Naeem Akbar has a book, Chains and Images of Psychological Slavery. What would you say are some of the impediments of Black folks not moving forward in the direction of financial literacy, et cetera, and Black life?
I will say this. Any of the things that we've talked about this evening in my book or what she spoke of, if you don't love yourself or love your people, none of it's going to work. Because that's where it all starts. Like if you don't love yourself, you don't have the confidence, you don't have the initiative, you don't have the confidence to take the drive, you don't see yourself being able to do it, then it all stops there. If you don't love your people, you're always going to believe that other person's store is better, it's cheaper, and it's better service, and that kind of thing. So that's from a human perspective. You got to love yourself, and you got to love your people, and that gets back to the individual home, it's back to the individual family, to making sure that you're doing the right thing culturally, exposing your children to them, to teach them about all the things we know about history, Black history, and you are somebody. I remember, I'm going to say this, and it might be a time. It was 1968, and they came to it was the Martin Luther King that got killed, and they did a survey. I'll tell you how lost I was in California. And they said, we'd like to have a Black history program or do something. What can we do? And I said, what did we ever do? You know, although I was brought up with Black people, I still think we could do so, but that's what I said, because I wasn't aware. I didn't know. Because they didn't teach anything close to Black history anywhere in elementary school, junior high school, high school, where I came from. Yeah, so that's what it's all about. It's making sure that parents that do know are lobbying their schools for the right education. It has to start, that's why I say the family. It starts with the family. It's so important. And then you have, as certain responsibilities, to make sure your child get an advocate. You're an advocate for your children, for the program that's necessary for them to love themselves and love their own people. That's what it all gets back to for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I have to answer this in two ways, because by far the strongest challenge to Black co-ops throughout history has been what I keep calling white supremacist terrorism and sabotage, right? Some of it's because of capitalist competition, but a lot of it is just because of anti-Blackness. And it's hard to say that because people don't like you to say it's an outside force or something outside, but on the other hand, that's what we live, right? We live in a racial, capitalist, exploitative, white supremacist terrorist system, and they don't want to succeed, especially outside of their system, right? So a lot of the white supremacist terrorism was because Blacks weren't using their businesses, right? We're figuring out ways to survive and do things without them, so ruining their profits, right? That kind of thing. So we can't underestimate that, but we can also look in the places where either they were under the radar and so the white terrorism didn't get at them yet, or in places where they figured out ways to get around it, like they had community members with guns protecting their co-ops, right? What else could go wrong? And the other things that could go wrong were the same stuff we keep talking about. Lack of knowledge, right? We don't know how to run co-op systems because we don't see them. They're not highlighted anywhere. We don't see them. We're not trained in them. So again, lack of knowledge is a huge barrier. And so getting the information out, I advocate for teaching K through 12, that we should start with kindergarten, teach our young people how to do economic cooperation, not just co-op when they play, because that's the message they get in kindergarten. It's okay for when you play, you have to share and cooperate, but when you're doing real serious stuff, you're not supposed to cooperate, right? In fact, it's cheating. If you talk to your neighbor, cooperate with another child, right? So we got to start in kindergarten with changing our understanding of what it means to work together, be successful, especially in the economic sphere. And then building that trust, because that's the next thing. If you've got to make decisions with other people and make democratic decisions, you've got to learn how to listen to other people. You've got to know how to deal with conflict. You've got to trust each other. So figuring out ways to build and develop trust. Remember, again, racism is so traumatizing, right? We often turn against each other. But this is a model where you have to depend on each other. You have to work together. You have to talk to each other. You have to listen to each other. I've been studying incarcerated worker co-ops. So these are worker co-ops owned by incarcerated people while they're in prison. And the guys that I've been interviewing in Puerto Rico, which has this model, every single person I interviewed talked about how one of the things they learned when they joined their co-op was how to listen to each other and how to operate as human beings while they're doing, making enough money to pay their families. And so we often, again, we either forget that or we live in a system that likes us to fight with each other. It doesn't want us to learn how to talk to each other and address conflict and that kind of thing. So I would say those are the biggest barriers. But I've also seen co-ops that succumb, right?
They're successful, right.
Right, that are successful, that deliberately say, okay, we're not gonna let that happen to us. We're gonna do trust building and bonding exercises. We're gonna train ourselves in conflict transformation. We're gonna use nonviolent language, right? So I've seen deliberate activities to make sure not to fall into those holes and to make sure that we were strong enough to keep those co-ops going.
So so as I'm hearing, it's the actual mindset then we're talking about, because the power of the title of your book, right? Collective courage, right? Collective courage. Collective courage is inclusive of the Montgomery bus boycott situation.
Yeah.
It's collective.
Right.
That they understood their value.
Right, they couldn't have survived if they didn't all follow that strategy, and they did it for a year, right?
Right, 385 days,
and it was also
right?
economic, right, because it was car sharing. The Montgomery bus boycott was also economic, they were car sharing,
Yes.
they were fighting the bus systems, boycotting the bus systems, shutting that down, so they had economic cooperation, they had social, and they also did legal, right? They had a legal strategy. So again, this ecosystem of addressing these issues from every possible side and doing it all for this notion we're stronger together. We have to stand together even if we're afraid, right? And for co-ops, that's why I use the courage thing, because it's scary to go against the grain, to do an alternative strategy, to do a system that the people in power don't want you to be in, right? But if we have that courage and do it together, it can work.
Oh shit.
So one of the things that comes to mind with this conversation when we talk about, internalizing oppression, internalizing trauma, and these sorts of things, respectively, for those who were speaking tonight, and maybe folks in the audience, like, what does it look like to, invest in healing, and invest in healing as an economic strategy? So you're just thinking through that. I think, sometimes if you say, oh, trust building exercises or whatever, it's like, I got bills to pay. I don't know about all that. But what does it look like to incorporate healing into a sort of economic strategy such that we can trust each other, such that we can, exchange resources without someone being like, there's money in my hands, I'm gonna, become anxious, just certain things in terms of, mental health. So I just wanted to raise that and seeing, that social cooperation and the economic cooperation is very much tied together.
So, in my book, I talk about that we need to understand education and learning as an economic resource, but we also need to understand trust building and wellness as economic resources, just for the things you said. I'll give you one example of how one co-op used the trust building. It's actually a house buying co-op in Atlanta in the mid-2000s. It was basically like mutual aid, but they incorporated as a co-op. So every member had to put in $500 a month, so that every 6 to 12 months, one member would have enough, $20,000 or more, enough to do a down payment on a house. In those days, $20,000 could give you a down payment. But that's a lot of money, $500 a month to put in and to trust, to wait till your turn, right? And there was an example of a couple who were in it. They wanted to do it faster, so they each were putting in $500. But they both lost their jobs. And 1 month they came to the co-op and said, we have to drop out. But that co-op, before you join, or the first month that you join, everybody does a bonding weekend and they do African trust building sessions. So when they came to that co-op that month and said, I'm sorry, we can't afford to stay in the co-op, we understand we'll probably lose our money, blah, blah, blah. The rest of the group said, no, you have to stay, we're gonna help you. And they all used their contacts, got them contract work, got them part-time work, enough work so they actually were able to stay in the co-op, keep their payments up, and eventually got their down payment and bought their house.
Wow.
So it's that level of why are we doing, right? So yeah, trust building, whatever sounds weird, but why, right? We're doing it because it matters, because we're all stronger if we can operate this way. And your health, wellness, healing is another big part of that, right? We have to figure out how to heal because we can't do any of this work if we're not well, either physically or mentally. And so a lot of co-ops are also addressing that. There was a co-op in San Francisco, actually, that had connected with Berkeley Free Clinic and got massages for their members. Because they're like, we need to learn how to take care of our bodies and how to relax and how to rest. It's not just work all the time, especially when a lot of it is about sweat equity, right? People are putting in a lot of their own energy and stuff. So paying attention to all those pieces, those are the co-ops that are stronger, that last longer, that have better better outcomes. So thanks for bringing that up, because health and wellness is really important.
We got one more question. Last question.
Oh, no, it's all good. No, I'm fine.
I can give one more.
I was just going to ask, so the idea, the micro-lending work that's happened in developing countries throughout the world, I'm wondering, have you guys seen examples of that in the US? And, are there like successful models? And is there a potential connection between like the micro-lending and cooperative development as well?
I haven't seen that specifically take place, but I would like to say that in Sacramento, we have an area that we call Black Wall Street. And an African-American gentleman there owns a large commercial building on 24th and Florence. And what he has done is that there are businesses there that can lease as little as 200 square feet, which really lowers their fixed costs and their ability to go in and be in business. There are over 50 or 60 Black businesses in that complex. One of the businesses that I have featured in my book is called the New Beauty Supply. And they went to one of the Asian retailers that sold hair, and they received poor service. So they decided, the three sisters, with a little help from one of them, husband, we can do this. So they went in, they started off with one of those 200 foot leases. Now they're up to like 2,500. They're thinking about franchising. They have sales, they do massages, they do everything. Very little capital. Each one of those had expertise. But as a result of that idea, I know in California, you can't probably hardly find a retail space of 800, 900 feet. So you're starting off with major fixed costs. You got to have $3,000 or $4,000 a month coming in already. So that has enabled, and that place is flourishing. And I would say that can, and I'm sure some places in America, I think I heard something in Atlanta, they may have something familiar, but there are other ways within the capitalist system to work around that. And those businesses cooperate, they work together, and you talk about how they raise money, who's going to give the loan, who's going to turn it down, those kind of things. So I am very encouraged by what I've seen there. And I'm just going to say this, I'm so encouraged by what I'm seeing for a lot of our young people and what they're doing. I mean, they're very much into entrepreneurship and doing for themselves. And it's encouraging. Despite all the bad news, there's a lot of good things going on that, of course, you're not going to hear about. That they don't make good news, I say.
Yeah, when the UN had its year of microfinance, I can't remember exactly when it was, maybe 2013 or 14 or whatever. I remember the International Cooperative Alliance had a tagline, which is, we're microfinance people too, right? Because a lot of co-op economics is very small, uses small amounts of money. especially in other places in the US. So they're not antithetical. However, I did write an article on this also, where I was comparing how credit unions and co-ops finance works with these microfinance to create micro enterprises. And one of the things I noticed was exactly what you said. A lot of the original lending programs, you lent to a group of women and they all had to pay back, or that nobody could get another loan. And so it was all about cooperation. The women helped each other to make sure every single one of them could pay back the loan so they could all get another loan. So I was arguing that a lot of these microfinance strategies are really cooperative strategies. They're just putting a capitalist lid on it kind of thing. And that we should, and that maybe we should go back to thinking about just do co-ops, since you're basically using the co-op principles and that kind of thing. And the last thing I want to say is I have seen, again, a combination of microfinance co-op kind of thing. Another study from my study on incarcerated worker co-ops is in Ethiopia. And one of the prisons, one of the regional prisons, Mekelle prison in Ethiopia, they have been encouraging especially women and youth prisoners to start co-ops as a way to help them gain skills and to make sure when they get out that they've got something, they've got a project or whatever. But they brought a state level microfinance company to the prison. There's a branch of the microfinance group in the prison to help do the financing for the co-op development for these co-ops to make them more feasible. They also have trained some of their corrections officers to be co-op developers. And they also allow any of their prisoners who are released to stay in the co-op and to come back to work in the prison during the day, even though they now live outside of the prison. So they've created, again, a whole ecosystem of support. But part of it is based on having this microfinance option so that financing isn't a barrier to these co-op development. So it is an interesting way to combine them. Unfortunately, some of the strategies with microfinance found out that women were getting beaten by their husbands because the money was only going to the women and things like that. But I think a lot of that has been worked out. And there's a lot more, as I said, these connections to doing co-ops and collective work with some of these microfinance.
Awesome, y'all. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. You've all been a fantastic audience. If you'd like to purchase the book, I will be back there selling the books. And if you'd like to get to know our third panelist, she will be stopping by in a couple of weeks. Her name is Jillian Hishaw. She's the author of Systematic Land Theft. So she will be stopping by to do a book signing in a couple of weeks, because she couldn't make it here tonight. But we have Jessica and David here tonight, ready to sign your book. So I think you should get it. Everyone have a great night. Get home safe. And thank you. Go make some money.
You're the mayor of Sea Pleasant?
Used to be.
Used to be, yes.
Yes, indeed.
One of the most dynamic people I know. Is Sea Pleasant.
Yeah, I was actually doing a wonderful job with Patriots and the children there. It's just incredible. Maybe you want to sign.